Well, here's a few news articles you might like. So they've got a New York app that will notify you if you get near to somebody who is infectious. And I was thinking this might be a good idea because I see so many people going around without masks, and so many people are proud of it. I saw Daly City cops without masks yesterday, so it might be useful to have an app like this for that reason. In a lot of people were upset about these things technically because they really don't work very well. They really don't measure how close you are to people accurately enough to be a whole lot of use, but they might provide you some level of protection against people who refuse to take a mask and to use a mask and social distance. And that has now become a sign of like masculinity and toughness and support of Donald Trump is to not wear a mask. So even though he's sick, I think his followers continue to feel like you shouldn't wear a mask. And so if you're going to be surrounded by people that won't avoid you, it might be good to have some idea if you know if they got sick. Although I think it still wouldn't do much good for those people because they probably wouldn't inform the app when they got sick anyway. So, and here's more about it. I mean, Trump kept saying, when people kept saying, you're not wearing a mask, you're not social distancing, he said, well, everybody around me takes a test. And I thought that never made any sense because the test doesn't even pick up that you're sick until like the 4th day after you're infected, and you're infectious before that. So it's an abuse of the testing to think that all you have to do is test and then you don't have to do anything else. And of course, now we can see that's true. I think 11 or 12 people in the White House are now sick. It is pretty awesome. Anyway, so the gun has special legal protections like the internet. There's a special law that means you can sell guns to people, and if they kill people, you can't sue for that. Just like if you put anything on the internet, no matter how horrible, you can't sue Twitter or Facebook. There are special laws to prevent this. Now, there used to be a legal protection for tobacco companies, although I don't think it was explicitly there, but it was implied because you couldn't prove which cigarette killed you. So they couldn't quite prove that the tobacco killed you. It could have been something else. But now they're trying to, there's a law here where you might actually be able to sue people, gun manufacturers, and gun sellers for people that are killed with guns. So this is very much like the tobacco case. If you actually are able to sue for that, that would actually greatly affect their ability to manufacture and sell guns. And here's a company that's kind of unbelievable. They want everybody to turn on Zoom, turn on the camera, and leave it on all day, every day, 9 hours a day, so that you can like sort of chat with people all day long while you're supposed to be getting your work done. And everybody hates it. This is quite common that bosses have these bizarre rules that nobody wants just so they can feel like they're in control. Teachers too. I don't know if any of you have been doing this. There are people who make people use some kind of anti-cheating software when they take a test. And from everybody's report, this stuff is terrible. It accuses you of cheating because you're moving your eyes and just drives everybody nuts. So in case anybody actually believes all the lies coming out of the White House, here's a scientific measurement proving that, of course, coronavirus is much worse than the flu, 13 to 20 times more deadly than the flu. There's a large right-wing conspiracy theory game to pretend there is no coronavirus. Perhaps Trump getting sick will help convince people it's real. Perhaps if Trump dies, they'll believe it's real, but I think very likely a bunch of them will just continue to believe it's a lie no matter what. Once you start people believing something stupid, you can't really turn it off. It's a fundamental weakness. When you give people some exciting fiction to believe, then you poison their mind. Now they don't trust anything they see on the news. So now how can you undo this? Maybe so Grindr is currently very vulnerable. You can get in other people's accounts, which is pretty gruesome. This is like the gay dating app. So I imagine a whole lot of people are on Grindr who really don't want the people around them to know they're on Grindr, or perhaps even to know they're gay. So it seems pretty bad that this invasion of your privacy could lead to a lot of bad consequences for people. Twitter has announced that people cannot tweet that they wish Trump would die, and that's fine, but now all the other people are screaming and yelling, saying, you know, for years, social justice activists, political activists, transgender people, and everybody has been reporting their thousands of death threats. And for that matter, anybody who would say anything against Trump, who have any prominence, I'm not important enough, but anybody else that says something against Trump, you immediately get death threats and rape threats like crazy. And Twitter would never do anything about that. So they pretend to have rules, but the rules apply differently to different people depending on how important they are. And people are complaining about that. Anyway, so I think I'll just get back to the official stuff here. So I've adjusted the schedule for this course. I had a couple extra days here, and like I said, I wasn't sure how long the student presentations would take. So I've adjusted it, and we're going to cover more of the book is my plan. You see, I'll do 3C today. I'm leaving the quiz not due till next week because you didn't have time to know that. But then I'll do 3D, and then we'll do more of chapter 4, which is very long. So I'm planning to do this. It may be necessary to change it again. Oh, and another thing that's important is Monday. You can get extra credit by going to this event. Just connect to this Zoom at 6 p.m. and the CSO of FIRA will be here. So it'd be quite interesting to hear from him. FIRA, especially, he's an example of the kind of management job you might be taking this class to get ready for. So I highly recommend tuning into this. And if you do, there will be an opportunity to get extra credit for attending it. If you can't attend it live, there'll be a video, but if all you do is watch the video, you won't get extra credit. So I'm encouraging people to show up for the live event. Anyway, let's take a look at the slides for this topic, which is the third part of chapter 3. And so we're going to talk more about the risk management life cycle. So you have to determine your assets. You have to decide how much they're worth so you can decide how much you should be spending to protect them. The obvious assets are hardware assets. How soon will the links on Canvas be updated? Well, I don't know, probably within the next couple of days. Anyway, the one due for next week does not need to be updated. The rest, it'll be a week before the dates are fixed. Anyway, so you got obvious physical assets. Many people don't keep track of their hardware very well, but you need to. All professional companies have these asset inventory tags so they can count them. You need to know what you've got. You need to make sure you have enough licenses. You really ought to notice if people are stealing them, and you ought to be considering whether they're updated and so on. So one of the steps towards being a more mature company is to actually keep pretty careful track of what you have. A lot of people use software for this. One common thing you do is put something on your software like Land Surveyor that will probe over the network and detect automatically all the things that are currently plugged in and connected. And that's one good way to keep track of things. But it's difficult. And you would like to know serial numbers, exact specifications of each device, where it is, and who's responsible for it. Who the owner's responsible for it, who's responsible for making sure it's taken care of, and who is the custodian who actually does the work of taking care of it under the supervision of the owner. And then you have to do a physical inventory now and then to see what happened. This affected San Francisco when we had a rogue network administrator who locked other people out of the San Francisco municipal network and then installed unauthorized remote control devices so he could like go hang out in Nevada, like gambling and stuff, and pretend to still be at work and remotely control the work network. When they found out he was doing all this unauthorized stuff and locked him up, they then had to try to find all the extra unauthorized things he had attached to the network. And there's nothing you can do there but trace every cable and do a physical inventory of your network to find out what's really there. Then, of course, you have information assets. Now, a fundamental rule, by the way, is that the data on the computers is worth more than the computers. If it wasn't, it wouldn't make any business sense to use computers. You'd just use pencil and paper. So the actual data is worth more than the hardware. And those are things like your customer information, your business contacts, your employee database, your things you've invented, which are there, your patent filings, your proprietary processes. And now a lot of that stuff is leased on other people's cloud services. So you don't even have them anywhere physical you can inspect them, and you may not even have a good record of how many cloud services you've got. One common issue is virtual machine sprawl. A lot of people will just buy Amazon cloud services and put things up there without even telling other parts of the management. So you've got parts of your business actually taking place on devices that are not really under control of your IT department. So that's why, an audit of it all is very important. And this is an issue. Your cloud-based information assets can be set up by anybody with a credit card, and it may be hard to find out how many of those you have, and then you want to ask what kind of data is out there and how is it protected. So this is virtual sprawl. All right, And also, this stuff can be automatically generated. If you, especially if you use Azure, Azure makes a big deal. If you use an Azure cloud server, Microsoft makes it very clear. They say you are not going to know how many copies of this server there are, or how many copies of the data there are, or even what country they're in. We have the right to move our stuff around on our network and do whatever we have to, and we won't even tell you where it is or how many copies there are unless you pay more for a special plan. So it is a thing to be aware of. Most people don't care, right? They put it on a cloud server. People are using it. As long as people can access it, they think everything's fine. But if you want to consider knowing where it is and knowing how many copies of it there are, that's not something they provide at the regular price. So anyway, you classify your assets. You're going to have to decide how sensitive the assets are. So you have the information sensitivity and perhaps how much it will hurt your company if it's gone. So that's criticality. And there you can decide how much you want to protect it, how much you want to have extra copies and extra servers to make sure it remains available, and so on. So first you classify your assets, and then you classify the systems. You have to consider everything, including systems that are not on your official servers. This one thing that Microsoft is very good at here, Microsoft is the only company I ever heard that actually addresses this common problem. Most employees have copies of company data and company emails on their home phone, their home laptop, their iPad. They put it in their Google shared drive, in Dropbox, on thumbsticks. It's just all over the place. And when the company wants to say, you know, we need to make sure that only authorized people have seen this data and we need a record of how many people had access to that data, it's very hard to find because some people you have fired still have a copy of company data. So Microsoft provides in their OneDrive system, which I think now has a different name, a way to encrypt all the cloud data with a key that is tied to your Active Directory login. So when you're no longer an employee and you no longer can log into the company server, you can no longer decrypt that data. So even if you have a copy of it in your Dropbox, it doesn't matter because you can no longer decrypt it. They're the first company I ever heard that will solve that problem. And that's one issue here. So then you classify it. You might decide how much it's worth. I think we talked about that. Yeah, you have various things that might matter. And so the secret is of course private stuff like passwords. Restricted is stuff that is not exactly as secret as a password, but it's stuff that really shouldn't be available to just everybody. And then, minor confidential stuff like network diagrams, and public stuff that it's fine for everybody to see, like your marketing material. Everything has to be classified in one of these categories, and then you will have rules about how they're handled. So the secret stuff would have to be encrypted. The public stuff doesn't have to be. The secret stuff cannot be put on mobile devices, but the public stuff can, and so on. You just have to have rules for all the situations here. And, even decades ago when I worked in a financial business, there was a special trash can for the sensitive stuff that would be shredded, but the other stuff you could throw in the normal trash can. It didn't have to be shredded. And that's the point. And here's the destruction. You have to plan it all, where you store it, what server you put it on, whether you can email it, and so on. You just have to have policies for each category of material, of information, what you can do with it. And then your systems. You've got servers all over the place, and your servers also are classified in various levels. So you'll have your network segmented. People come in from the internet. They go through some degree of firewalling just to remove the obvious useless attack traffic. And then you have a demilitarized zone where you put public information on public servers, like your web server, where everybody should be able to get there, but it should not have any confidential data. And then you have another firewall in here where you have things like your financial data and your proprietary data. And people can't get through that firewall without proving they're actually an authorized employee of the company. And so these devices out here are a low classification containing public data. These devices will be a higher classification, restricted only to authorized employees. All right. And so you try to evaluate how valuable your assets are. It would be nice in a perfect world to have them all boiled down to a certain number of dollars, but in practice, you often just have to be qualitative, which ones are more valuable than others. But to make it quantitative, you consider how much it would cost to replace them, how much revenue they generate, that's their net present value, how much it would cost to recreate the virtual machines, or the consequent financial cost, which would be how much would it cost to get breached, which would include regulatory fines, loss of reputation, customer lawsuits, and all the other expected consequences of losing that data. So let's take a look at the cahoots, which are here. 3C1, that looks right. And I've got 7 people, good, so I should be able to get enough cahooters to make sense of it, hopefully. All right. Good. Well, that's 6. I think that's probably all I'm going to get. So we'll go. All right, which one might be automatically created because of elasticity? Virtual assets, your more advanced cloud services like Amazon, if you get too much traffic, it can be set to automatically create more servers in response to the traffic. So that's what this is referring to. All right, which process will discover hardware theft? Right. You need a physical inventory for that. There's no other way to really be sure what hardware you've got. What's the cost of a breach? All right, that's the consequent financial cost. The consequences, how much damage will it do? And which one measures the revenue generation of an asset? That's net present value. How much good is this thing currently doing you? Not to tell me who they are to get their points. Applies to both of them. That's a real name. I know those are real initials. The others will have to tell me. Okay, I see. Good. I got asset. All right. Anyway, so let's go back to here. All right. So then you consider your threats. You have internal threats. Your own employees might do bad things, external threats, and then other types of external threats. The advanced resistant threat are enemy military, essentially, and all the very advanced crime groups. And emerging threats are the new things, newly discovered things that get a lot of attention at security conferences and researchers and such. Although most threats use old vulnerabilities, they don't really use the latest cutting edge stuff, just like most criminals don't really use any fancy techniques. They just use the same old tried and true techniques. So there are sources of threat intelligence from various agencies have lists of possible threats to consider. Internal, the most common thing, of course, is people just making mistakes, not even intentionally doing anything bad, just accidentally entering the wrong command, handing out data that wasn't supposed to be public, sloppily adjusting permissions wrong, not understanding their obligations, and so on. Then there are employees that deliberately do bad things, like the famous network manager in San Francisco who started locking everybody out of the network. A famous security trader bankrupted the firm through huge unauthorized trades. And of course, Snowden. This is System Administrator at an intelligence agency who leaked classified documents, and Bradley Manning also. This is the one that really terrifies people. Really big scandals caused by a trusted, high-privileged insider leaking out your secrets. And people ask, what can we do about that? How can we detect if one of our employees is becoming disgruntled and disloyal and going to deliberately betray us? And that is a very hard thing to detect and very important. And then there's just mistakes like Giuliani, before he got the president impeached, he would just put his phone in his pocket and it would dial journalists who would then hear him talking about crooked financial deals and so on. There's just lots of people that just make mistakes. And then, of course, all the natural problems, like now it's the virus messing up every company very badly. And there's also things like fires and such. And then there are external threat actors. Disgruntled former employees very commonly hurt their company on the way out. They will leave and then phone back in with credentials that haven't been canceled yet and erase the cloud servers or steal data. There's hacktivists who are driven by some sort of ideology where they believe that they're improving the world by hacking you and exposing your data. And your competitors. I read a few years ago, the most common type of denial of service attack is done by people who run a business and they hire some criminals to take down their opponent, their competitors, just so their website will go down for a while on an important sales day and people divert more traffic to your site. And of course, criminal organizations and government agencies are out there hacking everybody right and left. There's a cyber war raging around us, which a lot of people don't notice because the damage is not readily apparent. And so some of them are just trying to make money. Some of them are trying to push political agendas or military goals. And some of them are just troublemakers out of revenge or ego. There used to be a large group of hackers who would just hack something to gain the pride of having hacked it. That has largely declined over the last decade or so and been replaced by serious actors who are trying to make money. But there is still some of that ego-based hacking. These days, the ego-based hacking has kind of been diverted into bug bounty programs. Now you can actually get paid something and show off how smart you are, and that's kind of attractive. So you don't have to just become a criminal to show off you're smart. There's an organized way to avoid jail and also get paid some money. So that's kind of a good thing there. Anyway, the advanced persistent threats are the most sneaky, most dangerous company, and these are basically enemy military who want to hack into your company, and they don't want to just steal something or cause harm. What they want to do is hide and spy on you in the long term. So they work in slowly and carefully. They choose the technological level of their attack to match your expertise. So one thing they will do is test your defenses to see how smart you are. And if your company is sort of clueless, then they can come in. If your company seems to have a strong threat detection scheme, then they will carefully not use advanced methods because they don't want to burn them. So that's what's advanced about them. It does not mean they always use the most complicated attack. It means they are smart enough to use the right level of attack that is necessary to accomplish their goal. And this all started with China in 2010, hacking Google. That was the first one that made it public. They had been infecting almost every American company, and they still are, stealing proprietary data to benefit the economy of China, which they still are to a massive extent. They're in essentially every corporation. And only the most advanced corporations really have the ability to detect them and kick them out. And emerging threats are rapid feeds that give you the latest information for your intrusion detection system and other devices. SNORT has their emerging threats database, which just tell you the latest thing. Every week or so, a bunch of new things are discovered, and there are people who immediately jump on it, and there are new attacks, and if you haven't got the very latest patches, then you're vulnerable. So this is one issue, is to make sure that you are protected against new emerging threats. In practice, as I mentioned, most people don't bother using the new exciting attack. They just use the old standby. But if you do want to be protected from the newest threats, then you have to have some program of rapidly updating something like your antivirus or IDS definitions to deal with them. So vulnerability identification is quite a job. You can do vulnerability scanning, and you'll find things that are configured wrong with things like default passwords or unnecessary open ports. There are very commonly, you're using old versions of software or hardware for that matter that have an update that you haven't updated, and that's an unpatched weakness. Then, of course, there are 0 days. There are weaknesses that you don't know about, that the manufacturer has not issued a bulletin about, and that there is no patch for. And that's why you have to plan for defense in depth. You should have several layers of security boundaries so that even if one of them fails due to some weakness that you have failed to prevent, there's a possibility that a later layer of defense will still protect you. And this applies, of course, also to your cloud services. You're putting things on cloud, but the cloud services are just running on servers behind firewalls and so on. And all of that stuff may be vulnerable. So you might want to, threats are just listing all the bad things that could happen. The threat actors are the people that are, and why, I'd ask why they are motivated and who would want to hurt you. Your vulnerabilities are your weaknesses. And then you consider the asset value, and therefore you can calculate the expected impact. How much will it hurt me if this gets hurt? So there are various ways to calculate this: threat times vulnerability times asset value or probability. There are different ways to do it, but you try to boil it down basically to how many dollars per year do you expect to lose from this attack. And then you can decide how many dollars per year you want to spend to prevent it. That's the basic idea. And so you consider your general hygiene. How careful are people on your network? This is something I hear from a lot of pen testers. A lot of companies pay for a pen test, and when you do a pen test, you find that they're just not mature enough to even benefit from a pen test. They're just not even bothering to obey basic hygiene rules, like have a different password for everybody, close all the ports you're not using, turn on the firewall, and things like that. So a pen test is kind of ridiculous. It's like, no, what you guys need is just a basic security audit with like the top 10 things to do. And anyway, then you can consider these other reasons that would affect the risk at your company. And the impact could be direct theft of things that are worth money, or loss of business, losing market share, lawsuits, compliance fees, or just the business that is interrupted. This is the big one, of course, for ransomware. If they don't steal your data, which is the latest thing, and all they do is encrypt it, then you don't suffer most of this, but what you do is you just can't do your business. So you're losing all the money while you're out of business, and then your reputation is going down. This is what's happening to all the American hospitals that got ransomware this last week. So if you can't boil it down to dollars and cents, you'll just make it qualitative. So you have your consequences, extremely harmful to slightly, and how likely it is. And so things that are likely and that do a lot of harm, those are the things you really ought to be focusing on trying to prevent. Things that are not very likely or not very harmful, you might not want to waste so much time trying to prevent. But you try to sort the threats in this matrix, and then you can make calculated decisions how to protect yourself. So you have consider your asset value, what kind of threats are coming in, your vulnerabilities and possible controls, and then you can figure out how much harm you're facing and therefore how much work you should do to prevent it. So you have to interview people all over your company and look at the records and other incidents in comparable organizations to try to make a reasonable estimation to fill in that chart of how much you should be taking various threats seriously. One thing that is unfortunately fairly common is that people aren't really prepared to do this, so they just see advertising in the airport, or a vendor calls them and visits them and convinces them you have to buy our product to save you. And that's, of course, not a very scientific way to do it. You often end up buying some foolish product that does not really protect you from the real threats for your business, but just waste your time and money on something that doesn't matter to you. So you have qualitative or quantitative measures, depending on how well you can really quantify these things. So quantitative risk analysis, you have an asset value, an exposure factor is how much it would be hurt if the bad thing happened. And then you can get the single loss expectancy, how much you expect one attack that gets through to cause. And then you figure out how many of those are going to happen per year. And now you have some annualized rate of occurrence. And now you can figure out an annualized loss expectancy. This is the goal of quantitative risk analysis, to actually be able to say how many dollars per year this problem is causing me. Because then you can make a decision, well, I guess spending some amount less than that would be a good buy to prevent it. So Octave is is a technique from Carnegie Mellon, where you have you trying criteria You profile your assets, then you identify containers and areas of concern, threat scenarios, risks, and now you choose mitigation. All these are just organized ways to do the process there that we described. There's a Delphi method where you have questionnaires given to experts, so the expert opinion will guide you. There's event tree analysis coming from fault tree analysis. There's Monte Carlo simulations in this, as well as many other fields of science, where you do a sort of random number simulation to decide how likely something is going to happen, how much harm it's going to do you. There's various ways to sort all your risks. But the main point here is risks should be owned by people. Someone in your company should be responsible for dealing with this category of flaw, like denial of service attacks. Somebody will be in charge of that, and they will then be responsible for making sure we are sufficiently protected and responding to incidents and explaining to management what happened and why they failed when they failed and so on. You have to have somebody who's actually in charge of things. This is a huge problem at the college. Colleges are very famous for this. There's usually nobody in charge of anything, nobody responsible for anything, so bad things happen and nobody is really on the hook for it. And you try to avoid that at your company. It should be somebody's job to make sure that everything important is happening. So your risk treatments are this: you can just accept the risk and do nothing. This is what you do if you don't have any risk mitigation plan. But if you're organized, you carefully decide which risks are not worth preventing. Then you prevent it somehow with mitigation, with something like a firewall or a locked door or an armed guard or something. Then you have risk avoidance, where you just change your business process to no longer do that activity so you don't have the risk. Or risk transfer, where you outsource or hire or get insurance. You somehow make it somebody else's problem. So there's frameworks for this stuff. You try to avoid situations where you're wasting money mitigating things, where you're losing more money on the mitigation than the value of the asset. And that's when you would just accept the risk. And you should have some kind of administrative rules of who is authorized in the company to accept a risk. So you want to occasionally revisit your accepted risks and decide if perhaps things have changed and it is no longer appropriate to continue accepting risks that you accepted in the past, because perhaps your risk appetite has changed. You may have entered in another type of business where the legal requirements are different. You might have business partners that place different requirements on you and so on. So then you'll have controls, either administrative procedures or technical controls that lower the risk. And you may have to consider the legal and regulatory agencies. All these agencies are overseeing different types of business, and they keep updating and changing their rules. So this, for example, right now, a whole lot of American businesses are very, very uncertain because they're waiting for the election, because absolutely the next election will totally change the attitude of government toward business. Like all the big tech companies are afraid that the Democrats will break them up, and they told the Republicans wouldn't. So, this is the kind of thing, every few years, you have to reevaluate your regulatory requirements every time they update it. And I know now California passed this strict privacy law imitating Europe, but the Trump administration has not been enforcing it. So it would be very expensive to actually obey those privacy rules, and companies are deciding, do they want to take the risk of just ignoring the privacy rules, assuming that nobody is really going to enforce it, or do they want to really comply with it now because they think they'll have to? And if you were to waste your money complying with it and your competitor didn't, then you'd be at a disadvantage. So then you'd have to say, can we somehow advertise that we're complying and expect some kind of benefit to come from that would compensate for the price? These are the kind of decisions you have to make. And that's the issue here. If you don't comply with the law, it doesn't mean you immediately go broke or go to jail or something. It just means you have a possibility of getting sued or having a fine, and you can decide. It's impossible to really obey all the laws. They keep changing, and you can't even find them all. So there's no such thing as being perfectly legal. You have to sort of decide how big your risk is and try to comply. That's why in the early days of the Trump administration, people got mad at one of Trump's lawyers and said, he's just a fixer. And I was thinking, that's all any lawyer is. You get in trouble, you call your lawyer and say, we're doing this, and what are the chances we'll get sued? What are the chances we'll get punished, that's not necessarily a sign of you being any more of a crook than anybody else. You're just trying to do business. And if you do a business, you're going to have some legal risk all the time. Like the college gets sued all the time, just constantly, by disgruntled employees, students that get hurt or that can't make it up the sidewalks because they're not compliant with the disability laws or something. Just an endless chain of lawsuits come in. And that's true of every American business. So you could say they're all criminals. They're all breaking the law. That's one way to look at it. But anyway, there's just a steady amount of legal risk and legal expenses going on. Anyway, so you consider all these changes as you go ahead, and the end result is you have a total cost of ownership. If I'm going to own these buildings and have people going up the stairs and working in here, then that's going to cost me so much per year. The total cost of everything that comes with that, like fire suppression and paying lawsuits from people that fall down the stairs and get hurt and all that. And the same thing's true of your computers. Microsoft is big for this because Linux is free. So they keep saying you could have a server and a desktop and you wouldn't pay any licensing fees. And Microsoft said, yeah, but then your people wouldn't know how to use it. It wouldn't really have the features you need. You'd have to pay more to train them. You'd have to pay for a Linux administrator to keep track of it all. And if you actually got standard Windows stuff and Microsoft Office and paid the license fee, it would have a lower total cost of ownership because all the overhead of keeping it running would be lower. That's their argument. So anyway, here's total cost of ownership. You buy it, you deploy it, and set it up. Then you have to maintain it. You have to test it and keep measuring that it's still good. You have to train your employees to use it. You have to make sure that it meets the standards expected by your oversight agency and law enforcement, and you have to deal with it when you're done with it and you want to throw it away. You have to be able to clean it and such. This is what total cost of ownership is. How much is it going to cost you to do all this? And the thing that most companies discover rapidly is that paying for faster computers, bigger computers, the latest version of software is very much worth it because most of your cost is people. And if your people don't know how to do their job or they're wasting their time doing their job inefficiently, that really costs you a lot of money. Just getting them better computers is a wise investment in almost all cases. If your company is a profitable company making money, then you really want your people to have good stuff. Making them waste their time trying to limp through with poorly working stuff is not worth it. It's something that only nonprofit organizations do, where they're really desperate for money and they're willing to waste the time of their employees who are relatively cheap in order to avoid any upfront expenditure. That's what tended to happen at college and nonprofits is it's so hard to get any approval to buy anything that the acquisition cost is the only thing you think about, and you accept all these other things not working very well at all because you have to settle for whatever you can get. For example, donations from somebody, even though they're donating it to you because it's really out of date or not very productive. And the end result is colleges. I know research colleges are incredibly financially efficient. They accomplish great things with very little resources because they typically have out-of-date, broken, donated stuff, and they manage to accomplish something with that, whereas most for-profit businesses won't waste their time using old or broken stuff at all. They'll just have the newest because they have a steady flow of money in, and it's appropriate to spend some of that money updating their stuff. Anyway, this is 3C2. I think it's this one. Don't know why it's highlighted. All right. Let's see. I'm losing my mind here. 3C2. There, it's this one. All right. All right, this looks better. And I'll get the name of ants here. All right, good. And Davis says he's ready to present. All right. All right. Guess that's it. All right. Which one uses the latest techniques? Yep, the emerging threats. Good. All right. Insurance costs $10K per year. So what should you compare that to? Your annualized loss expectancy. That's what you compare the cost of the mitigation to. All right. All right. What method uses questionnaires with experts? The Delphi system, like the old Oracle at Delphi. You ask the expert. All right. Which one includes all the expenses resulting from a purchase? That's total cost of ownership. All right. So, okay, Joseph. And CCO will have to tell me who they are. And Vu is a real name, though. All right. Good. All right. Well, I'm going to stop this recording, and then I have we've got at least one student who wants to give a presentation. If anybody else does.